big deal. You know, that was really an accomplishment because he's trying to...
In the previous video, Dr. Tomlinson introduced the big idea of quality curriculum and how it relates to differentiation. In this video, she will continue with her presentation of classroom examples of differentiation. In addition, Dr. Tomlinson will relate J. McTighe and Grant Wiggins' Understanding by Design with differentiated instruction. Understanding by Design focuses on the material we teach and what we need to assess to measure learning. Dr. Tomlinson will show how differentiated instruction and understanding by design can work together to provide the structure, the tools, and the guidance for developing effective instruction and assessment. And now, Dr. Tomlinson.
How's the week gone, the 2 days gone for you? Have you felt like you have picked up new things? Reaffirmed anything? We will try this morning to see if we can make it a little further with the big ideas of differentiation. And again, I'll give you chances to stop and debrief, but you feel free to ask questions whenever you need to. So far, we've looked at the importance of connecting with kids, focusing on individuals instead of groups, and quality of curriculum. And this is the one where we left off yesterday, and we had looked at the importance of engagement and understanding as sort of a baseline in good curriculum from which to differentiate. And I showed you an example from a learning contract with an elementary poetry unit and told you that I wanted to show you as well some examples, in this case from science, really just trying to make the point that what we differentiate gives us a lot of power or takes the power away from us. And I want to share two science examples with you that some teachers created just to kind of make this point that I think is one that all of us struggle with, and that is, how do we make the curriculum as memorable to kids, as useful as possible? I was working several years ago with a group of teachers in the fall, and they were working on the understandings for their curriculum. And it was a big old group, and they were at tables, and I think all of us as teachers must have a little bit of Catholic stuff in us. We have this guilt trip all the time. This woman came up to me at lunch, and she said, "I'm so sorry if I didn't look like I was paying attention the last hour." Well, there were 300 people in there, so I would hardly have been able to tell whether she was plugged in, but I said, "Were you doing something that was useful for you?" And she said, "Oh, you won't believe it." And she showed me a sketch. Hers looked much better than this, actually. And she said, "While we were talking, for the first time in my career, I finally figured out what my subject is about." And she had created this bulletin board. And she said, "I just understood today that in earth science, everything is under the umbrella of change. Everything that we're talking about in earth science really is talking about some kind of change." And she said, we ask these questions no matter what unit we study. How does the earth change? Why does the earth change? When does the earth change? What changes the earth? Where do the changes occur? And what are the effects of the change? And she said it's kind of like each of the topics that we study, each of the areas that we study, is a funnel that's funneling change into the earth. So when we look at oceanography, we're talking about how things change on the earth through that lens or funnel. And when we talk about geology, we're looking at another kind of change in the earth. And we're always answering these questions. And I said, "Wow, that's pretty neat. I can really," and what I was standing there thinking was, I don't think I ever saw that when I was taking earth science. And she said to me, "I've been teaching this," I don't know if she said 15 years, but she said, "I've been teaching this for 15 years, and it's the first time I've ever understood what it was really about." And then she paused and she said, "So can you imagine how much better it'll be for the kids this year?" What she was going to do was put this up as an organizer and help them understand really the focus of what they were studying, the questions they were trying to ask, and how those recycle through the units that they were going to be looking at. That's pretty simple, but oh my goodness, it's better than 15 chapters of facts that you memorize in an isolated way. And if all of the kids saw that they were working with change and they saw that they were all answering these questions, it doesn't much matter if you do it with the first learning contract or the second one, or if you use this journal prompt or this journal prompt, or if you express it in this way or this way. Everybody can keep coming back together around those big ideas. And she was pretty excited about that, and I think it is really a step forward for a veteran teacher to come up with that organization. Meaning, again, if she differentiates, I think it'll be clearer and better this year because what she's differentiating is clearer and better. Here's one other example that's always been a favorite of mine. A colleague of mine that I taught with, who was our science coordinator in my district, had two teenage boys at the time, and both of them had grown up with their scientist dad, absolutely loving pretty much anything that had to do with science. They spent summers working on scientific things, and the boys read a lot and used technology amazingly well, even back when technology was not what it is today, to study science and to do their own work. And they ended up in their ninth grade year in a physical science class. And before that year was over, one was 1 year and one was the next, but before those 2 years were over, both of the boys hated science. In other words, what their dad had done to nurture the excitement of it had gotten killed for both of them. Needless to say, he was not a happy camper because that's not what he wanted for his own children. And so he said, I want to go take a crack at that class. I've got to see if I can do something to keep, if my kids who love science have this experience, what must it be like for kids who don't even get the point of science? So he asked to have a science class each morning in this middle school before he went on then to the central office to do the work that he was doing there. And on the first day of school, when the kids came into his class, he said to them, he introduced himself and he said, tell me what the grapevine tells you about physical science. What are you anticipating for class this year? How do you think it's going to be? What do you suppose the kids in the class said? Got it. Boring. And all 35 or whatever of them said that. And he said, well, I find that boring means different things to different people. Can you help me understand why it's boring? What is it about it that's boring to people? Then what do you suppose they said? Why do kids think something's boring? Why do they use that word, which is a cover word for many things? It's too hard, too much to memorize, can't understand it, don't know what it's used for, nobody gets it, pointless. And they gave him a whole slew of possibilities there. And he said, well, I'm glad I'm starting this way with you because I really just need to ask you a question for a minute. He said, how many of you think that you could learn 3 things this year? And they said, and he said, now how many of you think you could learn 3 things? Because if you can learn 3 things, I kind of have a feeling you'll get physical science. Could you learn 3? And the kids are going. And he said, okay, now to be really honest with you, I need you to learn 3 things and then a couple of things about each of those 3. But we've got September and we've got October, and he named all 9 months, so their eyes are rolling, by that point. And he said, you think you could learn 3 things and a couple of things about them if we had 9 months? Well, they thought so. And he said, actually, I think you can learn earth science today, physical science today. And I want us to try that, so I'm going to watch my watch, he said, and make sure we stop with enough time for you to learn the year today. But I want to talk to you a little bit first because I don't know you very well. And he said, so let's just chat for a minute if you don't mind, and let's talk about you a little bit in this school because I've not taught here before and I'm feeling kind of detached from everything, and I'm thinking if you can talk with me a little bit, share some of your thinking, it'll help me get oriented. And he said, when you came, how many of you are new here today? Well, nobody was. And he said, well, I am. When I came in this morning, he said, I felt a little bit disoriented. And so I'm wondering if you could tell me, what did you see when you came in today? What did you observe? What struck your eye? And so they told him about new lockers and a new mat at the front door and friends that they had seen that they hadn't seen for the summer and, looking for their classrooms. And he said, well, that helps me. That gives me a few landmarks. It gives me a little bit better sense of what I might look for or observe tomorrow when I come in. And then he said, let me ask you another thing. Tell me some events that I should think about this year in school. What are some events that are big here at school? Good ones, bad ones, scary ones, positive ones? And so they told him about games and yearbooks coming out and holidays. And he said, well, that's good. Again, I'm getting a little bit better sense of where your heads are. That helps me some. And then he said, okay, I'm still watching my watch. I want you to have a chance to learn the whole year today so that you'll go away knowing that this is completely doable. But let me ask you one other question. Again, I don't know you as individuals yet, and that'll get better as the year goes on. But I think at your age, and in fact at most ages, the relationships that we have are really important to us and kind of help shape our lives for better or for worse. What are some relationships that matter to you here at school? Which ones are good? What do you try to avoid? And they talked with him about those things. So now they're like 30 minutes into the class. And he said, okay, and he put this thing up on the board, and he said, physical science this year is about 3 things, and only those 3. All year long, we're really not going to talk about anything except observers, events, and relationships. And those are the same 3 things, of course, that he had just talked with them about in their own lives. So he got them to speculate about if they had observed something, what they think scientists observe? What sort of events might you be looking for that are different from, similar to theirs? What kinds of relationships might be there? And then he got them to go through and talk about these terms, what they knew about any of those terms. And then he cut off the overhead projector and he said, okay, take out a sheet of paper and tell me the year of physical science. Every single kid in the class got the observers, events, and relationships. Not a single kid missed that. And every kid got some of the things that were under those things because of the discussion that they had had. And he said to them, this is it, this is your year. All we're going to talk about all year, doesn't matter what the chapter says, we're going to be looking at observers, events, and relationships, and these topics under them. The following year, and he did this with them all year, he didn't just introduce it on the first day and then go back to studying the textbook as though this didn't exist. He kept coming back to this as an organizer. The following year, 4 middle schools fed into the high school. So that was 20 physical science classes that fed into high school biology. And the high school biology teachers said you could tell any student from Dick's class with the first discussion or the first piece of writing. And he said you never lost sight of who had been his students. Why do you suppose it stood out so much? Why was it so noticeable to the science teachers that his kids were there?
Because they would talk about things within the context of this paradigm that he had shared with them.
Which accomplishes what?
Gives them that organizer or framework for putting new information in.
Yeah, and so when they talk, how do you suppose they sound compared to kids in the kind of class that had turned off his 2 boys? What's the difference?
It made them care about their learning. It made them
Well, they care about it because they own it, makes sense to them. And what the science teachers were saying, they understood the stuff. They talked about it with understanding. They could actually bring meaning to that isolated stuff that was there before. He had given them the organization to really make sense of, relate to, transfer. And so again, my guess would have to be that if you differentiated in this class from a standpoint of meaning versus another class from a standpoint of memorization, the differentiation would be more powerful because what the kids are working with seems more powerful. Does that make sense, sort of? Do you agree? I mean, you know, in education there is no right answer, and every once in a while I'm sure I have this powerful illustration and somebody will say, I don't like that at all. And that's perfectly legitimate. It's just how we relate to stuff. But can you see from this the sense that curriculum power is a part of the whole picture? Somebody asked me to address this morning, so I put this in because of a request this morning, and this is a good place to put it. Her question was, could you show us how differentiation fits in for districts that have been studying understanding by design? How do those 2 things mesh together? Where do the parts go? And so I want to show you that here and make the connection with this curriculum piece that I'm talking to you about now. Wiggins and McTighe say, that the first thing we should do as teachers is sit down with that math book, sit down with the physical science book, and ask ourselves, what should kids know, understand, and be able to do at the end of a unit? They don't always use the term know, understand, and do, although I'm noticing with some of Jay's work recently that he's doing that more. But the terms are the same thing. They talk about essential knowledge, which is the K, essential skills, which is the D, and essential understandings, which is the U. It's exactly the same thing. Whole point's the same. And then they say at that point, when you've got your KUDs, design your summative assessments. And they use assessments plural because they believe, like most people who study assessment, that we know kids better if we get a photo album of their work rather than one single snapshot. Design the assessments, and if you do, they'll align perfectly because you're aiming the assessments at the goals. Almost guarantee that by the time you've practiced this and then you start working with the lessons, your lessons are going to be step 1 to get here, step 2 to get here, step 3 to get here, and so forth. And it's going to give you a much greater chance of alignment between your goals, your lessons, and your assessments. This is UBD right here. This is stage 1, this is stage 2, this is stage 3. That's the model that they have. Needless to say, there are a few thousand details about each of those stages, but that's the model. And all this stuff you can do on some weekends when you have time, in the summer when you can meet with some colleagues, and it's so peaceful because you can design all this really amazing curriculum like the events, observers, and relationships, or the umbrella with change. And life is perfect because you've got it all nailed. And then the kids show up. And those kids don't come to you all at the same place. And mostly what we've done as teachers is, if we have had the time to develop this, we just go in the classroom and teach it as though the kids were almost a second thought. Because, man, we created that amazing curriculum and we just got to go throw it out in there. But somebody's behind and somebody's ahead and somebody doesn't like something and somebody's daydreaming. And if we just keep teaching this without regard to the kids, I don't care how good it is, we're losing stuff all the way down the line. So differentiation says develop this, make sure it's this kind of curriculum to the degree that you can, and that just means a little better every year. And then check to see where the kids are before the unit starts. Does somebody already know most of that stuff you're going to teach? Somebody missing knowledge from 2 years ago or skills in math from 2 years ago that are going to impede their progress? Got any kids who can't read the textbooks? Got any kids with particularly strong interest? Figure out from the beginning where they are. And then you're not going to change this, but you sure as heck can change the unit plan to get kids there. And so once you have gotten the pre-assessment, you start teaching this in accordance with what you learned with that pre-assessment, and then all the way through the unit you use ongoing assessment. And as you teach step 1, you assess to see if kids are going with you, or if they've gotten ahead, or if they've fallen behind. And if you find that you've got kids who need support, you give them support. If you find out you've got kids who need to move ahead, you extend it. And all the way through this thing, based on what you find for assessment, you make the adjustments you're going to make. And then at the end, you administer the summative assessments. And always that's done in this wrapper that we talked about the first day, which is connecting with kids and creating a positive learning environment, because that really shapes everything that we do. And that's how those two models fit together. But if they didn't have names, if they didn't have UBD and DI attached to them, it still seems to me like it's just teaching. What do you think about that? I mean, if you really stop and think about it, we need to be real clear on where we're headed, and we need to know if kids got there. But before that time, we need to know if they're going with us, and if they're not, do something to keep them going, because that's our job. And that's really all this is saying. So what the point of this section is that we can differentiate anything. If I'm going to teach kids to memorize 200 math skills, I can differentiate that. And I'm going to do better to differentiate it than not. On the other hand, the quality of the thing that we differentiate certainly does impact the quality and the power of the differentiation. It's really hard to separate curriculum and instruction. Some days you may be thinking more about curriculum and it's in the foreground and the instruction piece is in the background. Other days you may be thinking more about the instruction piece and it's in the foreground, curriculum's in the background, but they all are a part of the same system. So let me get you to chat with each other about that for a minute. What about the UBD-DI diagram? Does that clarify anything for you? What do you think about the two science examples? Do you agree with the point of power of curriculum impacting the power of differentiation? Where are you with that stuff? What can you do to keep yourself moving? Talk about that for just a minute. I'll get you to clap twice.
Yeah.
To go away thinking, this isn't so bad.
Yeah, I can do this, right?
Things, yeah.
Right,
Yeah, you're only going to learn three things.
right.
But boy, they were diamond. But relating them to class, yeah.
Those big ideas are ingrained from day one.
Right, and I mean, they really are big ideas, you know, they're,
That's such a cool
but
idea.
right, but it really takes some thinking
Absolutely,
to come up with the
best,
ones
what you
that,
really
right,
need.
right,
Yeah.
the ones that truly relate to your discipline and, you know.
But then you know what's really interesting about that? It's mind-boggling sometimes to think of them, but then when they're there, they just seem so logical.
obvious,
Like,
exactly.
oh yeah, it's exactly what they should have been.
I can see why I'm facing the improvised differentiation that I have to face in the classroom. You know, and the series of reasons for it, lack of time, you know, just needing more information on how to do it, whatever. But I find this is just so, like, I love this. Just give me this, I can run with this. This is really great.
It's a good framework for thinking about all of the pieces and how they would fit together, and you know, so I think that's helpful in that way. In my school district, we have a document which is called Teaching to Standards, and we've gone and looked at Carol's work and pulled this together. I think what we're really missing is this piece, which we thought was like implicit or kind of like a, well, duh, isn't everyone doing that?
Right.
No, they aren't.
And you're finding out there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you go in and observe classrooms and that, you can see that. So that's the piece really, and I'm not saying we're doing this perfectly or whatever. I think we've made some big strides, and people at least understand this intellectually, and our focus really has been on assessment too. But I think these are our two big holes or gaps.
To make this work.
To make that really work.
And you know
exactly,
what's-
the assessment piece and then this piece, which you and I had this
The whole
conversation
learning
yesterday.
community, yeah.
If adults' heads aren't there already, I don't know what you can do about that, quite frankly. I mean,
The only way to achieve that, from an emotional intelligence point of view, is modeling. The only way that another teacher can start to be more engaging with their students, to stop using the little comments that will, you know, take away motivation. Well, didn't I tell you that yesterday? Like those kinds of things.
In the next video, Dr. Tomlinson will continue her examination of differentiated instruction and assessment as she looks at curriculum as a means by which teachers can respond to students' individual needs.